What's fascinating, and I know that you all have tons of conversations around financial markets, is this concept of confidence, which is associated with credibility. And sometimes the example that I'm going to give you now is more recent. It's the Euro crisis. And the example is the European Central Bank President Mario Draghi's whatever it takes speech. So this is actually an example of confidence and credibility in turning the corner of the Euro crisis. So I was there in July 2012. You might remember the date because that was the start of the Olympics in London.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And so the government put together a conference, the Global Investment Conference, because they said, all these people are coming to the Olympics. We should make the most of it. So I was actually there, and it was unfortunately 2 years into the Euro crisis at that point. You might remember all the protests in Greece, the misery caused across the Eurozone, countries being rescued, and there just seemed to be no respite from this crisis. So Mario Draghi, who's the president of the European Central Bank, he gave a speech in which he said, at Lancaster House in central London to all these, global business people and policymakers. And he goes, none of you really understand the political will behind the euro. Believe me when I say we will do whatever it takes to safeguard the euro. And you can see right after that, financial markets believed him. The spread between risky government bonds, so, Greece, rescue countries like Portugal, started to narrow vis-a-vis safe haven assets like German bonds. So I write about in the book, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner was impressed. He went to Frankfurt, the headquarters of the ECB, and said, tell me about the speech. How did you come up with it? And it turned out that Draghi had ad-libbed it. It wasn't actually in his speech. He just stood up and said what he thought. And so there was actually nothing backing it. Later on, pretty quickly later on, Angela Merkel, the Eurozone leaders, backed him up. But they have actually been saying this for some time, which is we politically back the euro. But doing it after Draghi had made that speech was viewed as, adding to the credibility people already believed. And then eventually Draghi got, the power to do a few other things that bond markets are looking for, but he never actually used any of those policies because the credibility of the central bank and the politicians standing behind the single currency turned the tide. It didn't end the euro crisis. Unfortunately, that just continued on and causing misery for lots of people across Europe. However, the acute phase of it changed. And what I mean by that is after that, when Greek government bond yield, so that's the cost of the Greek government borrowing, shot up to like 32%, there was no contagion on the rest of the Eurozone bond markets. And so that's telling you they think it's contained. And then the Euro crisis obviously eventually resolved itself. But that was just over a decade ago. And it's an extraordinary example, I think, of confidence and why that's so important for investors.
That was a clip from a recent conversation we had with Linda Yu about financial crashes. If you want to see the full episode, then just click here.